All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Pascal Hensel, and I am your MC for the Big Ideas 2-track. I work as a strategic growth associate at Young Catholic Professionals, an organization that seeks to evangelize, inspire holiness, and influence society for the better by building professional networks for young adults and delivering programming such as speaker events, panels, happy hours, retreats, mentoring, and more. We have 30 chapters across the country with many more in the development pipeline, and we are thrilled to see the energy and ambition of millennial and Gen Z Catholics across the nation. Along with our energy, many of us younger folk, as immersed as we are in the latest secular trends that target us, have a keen interest in the ideas and technologies that are fresh, cutting edge, cool, innovative, and so on. But many of us younger folk also are religious and have grown to recognize the importance and timelessness of Holy Mother Church. And so it is my distinct honor to join forces with the Catholic Crypto Conference and explore these questions at the nexus of faith, charity, society, and technology. Now, before we introduce the first topic and speaker for this track and kick off the talk, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, throughout the duration of the conference, if you have any questions, are lost, need any help, look to someone wearing one of the dark blue polos, or just go to the help desk, which is where you registered this morning. Second, and in a similar vein, as this is the first Catholic crypto conference ever, expect a couple bumps here and there, but also feel free to share feedback with those dark poloed helpers. Third, our sessions are being recorded. So as an attendee, you will have access to the videos of the sessions and expect more information to be shared by the conference planners a little bit later. Fourth, and lastly for now, I'd like to give a special thanks to the founding sponsors for this conference, Ave Maria University, Crescite Innovation, Solidarity Healthcare, and Visiting Angels Home Healthcare. So our first topic for this track is building a parallel polis, sociological and technological decentralization. Amid trends of centralization across the board, big state, big tech, big data, big media, and so on, how does decentralized ledger technology play a role in revitalizing individual communities and protecting the church from deplatforming or denial of service? Helping to answer these questions is our first speaker for this track, Michael Matheson Miller. Michael is a senior research fellow at the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty, a think tank that seeks to promote a free and virtuous society characterized by individual liberty and sustained by religious principles. The Acton Institute also supplied the excellent conference bags that you all received, and be sure to take a look through those. In addition to his work at Acton, Michael is also the director and producer of the award-winning documentary Poverty, Inc., and the Gospel of Work, the Poverty Cure DVD series, and the Good Society series. He was the founding director of Poverty Cure, which seeks to promote entrepreneurial solutions to poverty, a co-founder of a biotech firm focusing on extending health span, and author of a couple books to include the forthcoming Excluded: How the Poverty Industry Excludes the Poor from Justice and Prosperity. We're thrilled and grateful to have him here today, so please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, does that work? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, good. In fact, so I'll just put this down on the ground. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about the parallel polis, and I'll explain what that means and all those ideas. But since we're at a Catholic crypto conference, let's begin with a prayer. Highest, most glorious God, cast your light into the darkness of our hearts. Give us right faith, firm hope, perfect charity, profound humility with wisdom and perception, that we might do what is truly your holy will. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So as Pascal said, first of all, I'm very delighted to be here at the first Catholic Crypto Conference. I gave a talk on technology recently, and someone asked me, Catholics, how should we think about technology? Should we just opt out of technology? And my answer was that God created the world good. He declared being is good. And from the beginning, we're called to participate and with God in completing creation. And so we are, in a sense, we're technological beings. We are always doing technology, whether it's pen, paper, or blockchain. And so it's very important that I think we engage in these questions of technology. So I'm really happy for that Matt Pinto and all of his team organized this, and that I've been invited to participate. So the thing I want to talk about today is this idea of building a parallel polis. And the words parallel polis come from a Czech dissident during the communists, during the rule of the Soviet Union, named Václav Benda. He was a Catholic dissident, had 6 children, and was in prison for a while. And he had this idea that we needed a parallel polis, that is, a city that goes alongside the dominant city. And so I'm going to argue today that we have a number of threats coming at us from digital technology, from society, politics, and what I'll broadly call a transhumanist movement. And I'll explain all this, the new ontology of the person. And all of these things are putting pressure on groups, especially Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Orthodox Protestants, that are going to make it difficult for us, or increasingly difficult for us, to participate in social life, or it could be. And I think the threats are real, and they're coming. And so what I want to argue is that we need to be proactive in addressing those threats now, and build this idea of a parallel polis, and that is connected to the idea, of course, of decentralized ledger technology, personal servers, smart contracts, DAOs, et cetera. And so in summary, and I'll go into it in detail, that the parallel polis is not really an escape from society, but it's building functional, autonomous, decentralized associations that are private, that allow us to operate in society as a leaven, okay? So for example, banking, credit unions. Okay, schools are kind of obvious, right? So I'm on the board of a classical school. We don't take any government money. We've grown from 60 students to 400 students. We have both homeschool and full-time, K through 12. So that's a private association. But we worry about the concept of deplatforming and other things. How do we make sure that we don't get deplatformed outside of school? Well, banks, credit unions, health insurance, doctors, medicine, et cetera. Okay? So let me put it in maybe a term that Catholics can understand. I'm kind of arguing for, which will maybe sound a little bit, make you worry for a second, but a geographically diverse re-ghettoization. Okay, what do I mean? Remember, the Catholics lived in ghettos, right? Why did we live in ghettos? Because in many ways we were unable to participate in political and social life. So I was at all the Philadelphia exhibits yesterday. And Charles Carroll of Carrollton, of course, wasn't allowed to vote in the Maryland Senate, in the Maryland Congress, but he was able to participate. They made an exception for him to participate in signing the Declaration because he was Catholic. And so Catholics were locked out. And of course, you saw African Americans being locked, not only in slavery, but post-Civil War, African Americans had to build their own towns, their own ways of living. And so when I say we need to have a re-ghettoization, I don't mean that we all move in the same place and live in communities, but actually modern technology allows us to be decentralized and geographically diverse, but to build these functional autonomous associations, subsidiarity and solidarity, okay, very much part of the tradition, so that we can continue to be a leaven in society. So that's my big picture. And so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to first go over just some of the technological threats that are on our minds, and like maybe some small-term solutions we can do for that, and then I'll go into this question of the threats of transhumanism, the new ontology of the person, and back and explain the parallel polis in more detail. So, does this thing work? Okay, so we're all aware of the problems of deplatforming and cancel culture. These are some of the threats from digital technology. Digital technology, as we've heard, has brought incredible benefits, but it also comes with threats. probably the most obvious and the one that's on a lot of people's minds, which connects to the parallel polis, is this problem of deplatforming. So Ryan Anderson's book on transgenderism was deplatformed from Amazon. Facebook, they blacked out news in Australia for a while. Now, this is important because, a lot of plumbers and carpenters or everything, they put their whole business on Facebook. So if it's blocked out, they're excluded. So this is one of the things I say is don't rely on centralized services as your kind of core elements for your business. If you want to use Facebook for advertising or whatever, of course, but make sure that you own your own data, okay? So, and then of course, even Rand Paul, who's a senator, was suspended for saying that some masks don't work as well as others, okay? So, I mean, at this point, we're kind of laughing about it, but he was banned off of YouTube for that, all right? We see the rise of surveillance, what Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff has called surveillance capitalism, and the rise of the social credit state. And so for those of you who follow China, there's interesting books like You Will Be Assimilated by Golden and like, what's the other one also on assimilation, on how basically the social credit state is tracking every single thing that we do. Well, we don't have that depth of a social credit state here, but it's increasing because of data collection. So let me actually stay on data collection for a second. So one of the ways, as you know, that modern centralized technology works is that it's free because you're the customer. You're not the customer, you're the product, okay? And so our data is collected and then sold, and that's how big centralized companies make their money. That means there's incredible amounts of data around, and people aren't very good at holding that data, so that our data isn't secure. So we're constantly being surveilled and monitored all the time. And right now, people will say, like there's some libertarians who will say, well, I don't really care if Google or Amazon takes my stuff as long as the government doesn't get my information. But that's actually missing the point that the state is just outsourcing, right, that work to Facebook and Google and Amazon, et cetera, all right? And there's problems. I wrote a little book called Digital Contagion, where I go through like 10 steps we can take to solve these things. I'm having to leave a lot of this out. Some of this you already know, but these are some of the problems of like this economy. And part of the problem, actually, goes back to a Catholic understanding of justice. We don't understand the difference between commutative justice and distributive justice. And what we've done is we have a failure of justice of exchange. When I'm in an exchange commutative justice relationship with you, I'm buying something from you and I'm receiving something back. And so we're in a thin social contract with one another. Okay? When things are free, there's no social contract. So I did a documentary called Poverty, Inc. that was mentioned. If you want to know how free things disempower you, ask Africans and Latin Americans who've received free things and have been excluded from prosperity. So we have to be careful to avoid free things. But the other problem, of course, is propaganda. And this propaganda has impacts on our lives. So, if you go to Google and you put "can a man," it'll autofill "get pregnant." Okay? And you can look at the answer, which I'll need my glasses for. It says, people who are born male and living as men cannot get pregnant. A transgender man or non-binary person may be able to. However, it's only possible for a person to be pregnant if they have a uterus. Okay, so right away, we're being propagandized with this transhumanist element. So remember, by the way, and I can't explain this, but transgenderism is really a subset of transhumanism. Okay, if you want, I can explain that to you offline, but it's a subset there. And so you see this propagandas everywhere. And then another big problem we have is behavior modification. Jaron Lanier is a technologist. I did an interview with him for a podcast I have called The Moral Imagination. Jaron Lanier is a progressive. I don't think he's a believer. He was one of the founders of virtual reality, and he says he doesn't use any social media. He says, we are being tracked and measured constantly and receiving engineered feedback all the time. We're being hypnotized little by technicians we can't see for purposes we don't know. We're all lab animals now. He actually told the story of Norbert Wiener said, look, I'm not really worried about operant conditioning and behavior modification of like a Skinner box, because in order for that to happen, everybody would have to be attached to a behavior modification device all the time. Like this. Okay, so we have this threat of propaganda. Now again, we also see problems with mental health. TikTok serving up sex and drugs and videos to minors, Facebook and Instagram with teen anxieties especially, and on and on. And so we have this disordered relationship between man and the machine. So I'm going to do this quickly. I want to say something really important, that is code is not neutral. Okay, it's super important to understand this, okay? Architecture is not neutral. Code is like architecture. This is Florence, okay? This city is going to shape you and reflect human views, cultures, ideas, and beliefs. It's going to shape you and be shaped by ideas in a very different way than Brasilia. And they only forgot one thing when they made Brasilia, that human beings were going to live there, okay? Art and architecture, okay? This is the Los Angeles Cathedral. Okay, this is going to shape you, and it's being shaped by ideas in a very different way than this. Okay, so it's very important that code is not neutral. And this is why I'm so happy that we're having this Catholic Crypto Conference, because we need actually Catholics with a deep, rich understanding of the goodness of being, and that we're embodied, embedded persons to write good code that serve human flourishing. All right, now we also have, as I said, the threats of transhumanism. And the new Tower of Babel, I would argue, is man himself. Okay, that we're going to recreate the human being. And so you've heard people idea we're going to upload ourselves. Okay, and you see this, of course, immediately with the transgender element. So I want to say just very briefly, I think there's some little things we can do, like use a VPN, stop using free services, pay for your email, like I use Proton Mail. I don't get any money for telling you that. You can do things to, in a sense, minimize the data collection. But the deeper, bigger threat that I want to focus on is really this transhumanist threat, and especially what I'll call the new ontology of the human person. Okay? So we have the threats. So think about all the deplatforming and social and financial exclusion. I think it was Sam Brownback started an organization having to do with liberty. They were actually, I think, deplatformed by Chase. They said, we're not going to process your finances. You saw PayPal recently said they were going to charge people $2,500 for misinformation, right? Like, for example, the vaccines don't stop transmission. That would be misinformation until Pfizer told us, well, the vaccines don't stop transmission, okay? Right? And so you see how banking and technology is being used to shut down opinions, to like turn off dissent, et cetera. So what we're dealing with now is not just the technology, but we're dealing with really serious social and political threats, and where dignity is being used as a weapon against religious liberty. So Catholics are very comfortable with dignity. It's in Dignitatis Humanae. We think the dignity is very important. And who you are is less important than what you hold. So a priest cannot deny the sacraments to a black man and a white woman because he doesn't like black men. Because who you are is more important than what you hold. Okay? And this is clear in Dignitatis Humanae, and that's right. What's happening, however, is with a new ontology of the person, dignity is becoming a weapon against religious liberty. So I'll give you like a little St. Thomas Aquinas here. If you remember in St. Thomas Aquinas, you have an essence. We are a certain kind of being, an embodied, embedded human person created in the image of God. We have an essence. And then we exist, okay? And we exist in that essence. Well, in the existentialist movement, you have like people like Jean-Paul Sartre saying, well, we don't have essence. We just have raw existence. We just exist, okay? And then we create ourselves. Now, there's self-creation in St. Thomas Aquinas and in John Paul II. So we do in one sense, but this is like radical self-creation. We just make ourselves. Now, radical self-creation gives you the ability to do whatever you want. It ends up becoming a diabolical freedom, right? But nevertheless, you can do what you want. But it doesn't really give you any ground to get political rights. So what happened is, St. Thomas, think about it this way, it has been inverted. And so now you start with a raw essence, existence, you're just there, and you choose your essence. All right? And we've identified sexual predilection, LGBTQ, et cetera, on being. And so the person chooses his or her essence, and then think of it as a plastic anthropology, the plastic hardens. And now that's who you are. And remember, who you are is more important than what you hold. And so we're redefining the person based on sexual predilection. Now, this has been written in the Yogarta Principles of the United Nations. It's in German law, it's in South African law, and it's been increasingly coming into US law. Right? There was a decision yesterday with gay marriage, okay, that we'll talk about. And then Michigan, where I live, unfortunately has abortion laws like North Korea. It just was passed where it's a constitutional right to an abortion. There's no parental notification or consent required for minors. So that's going to make Michigan a haven for sex traffickers, okay? And everything having to do with reproduction, including sterilization. So a man or woman who's grooming a child could bring that child to get sterilized with gender surgeries with no notification and no consent from the parents. All right. So now here's the other problem. That's bad, okay? And it's unjust. It's fundamentally unjust to children, and it's unjust to people who are vulnerable. And so I can talk all about that, but I'm not going to. What the problem, of course, is that if it's a constitutional right, and it's very vague right now, it's going to be worked out in the courts. What happens if a woman says, I would like to be an abortifacient or an abortifacient from a doctor, and the doctor says, I don't believe in that? Are they violating their constitutional rights? So what we're going to find is schools, businesses, physicians, everybody else are going to be forced to comply with the new ontology of the person. Okay? This is going to be fought in the courts. So we can pray and work. We need to be involved in politics. We need to be involved in law, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not saying there's only one way to do that. But what I want to say is one of the things I think we have to do now is we have to build a parallel polis. And so how do we respond to that? Well, we have to build functional, autonomous, decentralized associations. These are not brand new. All right? Robert Nisbet, in his book, The Quest for Community, says in the medieval period, these kind of things were flourishing all over the place. Alexis de Tocqueville, so there's a Catholic tradition for it. Yesterday, I went to the Jesuit church in Philadelphia, the old St. Joseph's, and it was some Jesuit martyrs, and they said in the 1600s, these Jesuit martyrs actually created these organized groups in Paraguay and Uruguay about, like, basically private civil associations, right? We see out in the United States, Alexis de Tocqueville said, when you go to France or England, they're always going to the magistrate, the king, to get something done. In the United States, we form associations. And of course, in the Catholic tradition, from the Knights of Columbus to all these different sodalities, schools and hospitals are all independent organizations. Unfortunately, and I know I'm going fast, and there's a lot of nuance I'm leaving out, so I realize that, but unfortunately, Catholics over the last 70 years have assimilated in negative ways into America. Now, part of that assimilation was good, right? We were not excluded, we're not ghettoized, we're part of the world, we should be 11 in the world. What unfortunately happened is a lot of our institutions were taken over, or we gave them away, okay? So Catholic schools are like the dream of a Marxist. Wait, you've got all these children, and they're in Catholic schools. So instead of like building Marxist schools, they just kind of move their way into Catholic schools, all right? So we've lost some of the institutions, and that's okay. That's the way it is. So I think we need to rebuild those institutions. So let me talk examples. So in the parallel polis, obviously schools, but let's say doctors, banking, credit unions, so that we can't be deplatformed easily. Now, I'm working on this, and I know there's some lawyers in the room, so I'm very happy about this, and I'm talking to lawyers. I actually have meetings next week with lawyers to talk about this. It looks like in the United States now, there's three rights in the First Amendment, right? Religion, speech, and association. And they're all a little bit under attack. But association is especially under attack. And there's reasons for it, especially like post-Jim Crow and everything. It's complex. But association is under attack. So it looks like what we probably have to do is create explicitly Catholic associations with doctrinal beliefs and affirmations of a dignity of the human person as an embodied, embedded, biological, and souled organism, right? So we're not just driving around our body like we're driving around in a car, right? And that's why the whole idea of like abortion and transgenderism comes from Gnostic understandings of the person that reject the goodness of matter, all right? Sorry, I used to be a philosophy professor. Okay, and so we have to affirm these things explicitly and then create mutual aid membership associations. So for example, instead of just doctors, like I go buy things from the doctor, we create an association of doctors, nurses, and patients who affirm these beliefs, and we create a practice of mutual aid society. Same thing with insurance. Now, this is already happening. So Samaritan Ministries is working, they're mostly Protestant. You join as a member, and you agree to certain both Christian principles and that you're going to negotiate with the doctor, right? So you have to say, it's $30,000, I'll pay you 22, right? You got to negotiate. And then you submit it, and everybody sends you a check. Okay, these are like old school sodalities. Before the welfare state, there was what's called mutual aid societies. They were all over England, all over the United States. Okay, and they're part of Catholic sodality tradition. So it's part of our tradition where people are helping each other. So the Knights of Columbus was ways for Catholics to get life insurance, disability insurance, because they couldn't really participate in some parts of life. We're also going to need credit unions that are the same way, right? So for example, let's say Peter here has a business, and Peter's, okay, and I'm going to pause for a second. Notice with the HHS mandate, we actually got some victories. So like AutoCam, John Kennedy got some victories there. But one of the problems is that the Catholic Church will get protected, which is great. Okay, we want the Catholic Church to be protected. But what if you own a Catholic business or you're a Catholic doctor? Right? Now it's a little bit harder because, well, you're just a regular person. You're violating associations. So this is why I think we have to create like explicitly Catholic associations. And this is going to come with challenges because you know what happens when, the Catholics get together and they just argue about everything, right? I mean, just think right now, and this actually related to social media, like the ridiculous arguments like over liturgy or Vatican II, and I mean, it's just like people are over the top, okay? Everybody's intense. Which part of Vatican II do you like? And they get this big major debate. So like the idea of actually bringing Catholics together kind of makes me worried, but I think it's actually something we probably have to do, all right? And so you create these elements that are membership based, and then so let's say Peter, for example, has a business, and it's just a regular business, but he holds to positions that are unfashionable. So Chase or Wells Fargo said, well, we're not going to process your payments. Okay, well, he needs to be able to go to a credit union that will happily process his payments. He needs to be able to get insurance for his employees that don't pay for abortion or abortifacients or gender changes and all those other injustices. Right? So we have to figure out how we're going to manipulate it, all right, and what to do. Now, of course, how does this relate to decentralized ledger technology and blockchain? And I think the answer is that the first thing is this. We cannot build functional, autonomous, decentralized associations on centralized technology because they will shut you down, right? And Google is not your friend. So that's why I like to say Google delenda est, right? Which for the classicists, Google must be destroyed. Okay. My children go to classical school. Some of the children came and heard this talk, and like no one laughed except the dorky Latin scholars in the back. They were like, yeah. Okay, so that's the only Latin I know. All right, so we cannot build them on these centralized platforms. We have to build them on decentralized platforms, whether that's blockchain. And so like Deacon Rich back there talked about like, decentralized blockchains doesn't only mean crypto, right? That they're harder to shut down. Maybe they have to use personal servers. We can use, DAOs. There's a whole host of things that I think we need to work out. And that's going to take work and effort, in a sense, and that's why this talk is social and technological decentralization. Because we need to both create subsidiarity, social decentralization, and use technology to be able to, in a sense, create space and protect ourselves around it. So it's going to take legal, economic, and technological, and social innovation to accomplish this. But there is a tradition. We're not simply reinventing the wheel. And there's other interesting people. Some of you may know the work of Balaji Srinivasan. He's written a book called The Network State, which I'm just like in now, but he's talking about some similar things, right? So that and one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that Alexis de Tocqueville, the great Alexis de Tocqueville, said that individualism leads to centralization, and centralization exacerbates and causes individualism. And so he said, when that happens, you get what's called soft despotism. And this is how he described soft despotism in the 1830s in America. He said, this is what kind of despotism I think America could have. He said, and this is almost a quote, because I like Tocqueville. He said, I see a multitude of people circling around themselves, seeking after the petty and banal and vulgar pleasures with which they glut their souls. And above them stands the state. It regulates their industry, it divides their inheritance, etc. It would be like a father, but it doesn't want you to grow up. These people are like sheep without a shepherd. And he said, in order to resist soft despotism, you need three things: local politics, religion, and civil society. And so part of what I'm arguing in the parallel policy is we need to reinvigorate civil society, right? And he has this great line that I love. He says, the tyrant does not care whether you love him or not, as long as you don't love one another. And so part of what I'm arguing we have to do is we have to build this parallel polis. Now, the big question is, won't the state come and crush us? And the answer is, maybe. I don't know. All right? But here's what I think is important, is that, and I say this in multiple reasons, civil associations and private associations are good because we're embodied, embedded persons with a social nature. So we're not simply radical individuals, nor do we simply exist for the collective. But we exist as embodied, embedded persons in communities. And this is part of the Catholic understanding. So sodalities and subsidiarity allow for that part of human flourishing. They also create resistance to the state. So if you think about the Magna Carta and the barons, this is a resistance to the state. Same thing with civil associations. So can the state shut us down? Well, we should build these anyways, and let's say the state does come say, all right, we're going to come to your church over there, and we're going to build a road through it, make it difficult. If you have leaders of credit unions, medical corporations, insurance societies, et cetera, associations, and they come to City Hall and they're like, we have constituents who live in this parish, and we find this is like a really problematic thing, you're showing political power. Has anybody ever seen the movie Malcolm X? Okay, all right, it's a great movie, all right. The book is great, with Alex Haley, the book is great. But there's a scene in Malcolm X where Malcolm X and some of what are called the Fruit of Islam go to get somebody out of jail who's been arrested and needs to go to the hospital. And there's kind of a protest, and he's all lined up. It's a great scene. If I had a video, I would show it to you, because it's this wonderful scene. And he stands up and he says, we want to see Brother Johnson. Like, who are you? He said, we're brothers of Brother Johnson, and we want to see Brother Johnson. He's like, you got to get out here. He goes, why don't you look outside? And the policeman looks outside, and there's all these men lined up in order, ties, everything, okay? And so they finally get Brother Johnson. They take him to the hospital. And there's a protest going on, and the policeman comes up, and he says, you guys get out of here. He says, my people are stand up and very disciplined. He goes, the rest of the people are your problem. And he goes, okay, well, let's make sure it happens. As long as Brother Johnson's okay, I don't think you have anything to worry about. So the doctor comes out and he says, he's going to be fine. Okay, so those of you who have seen it, you remember the scene? The scene is epic, okay? You can find it on YouTube. And so they're all lined up, and Malcolm X says, okay. So he turns around, he looks at the men, and he goes, and they all move, and they march out. And the policeman says, that's too much power for one man to have. Well, what that is an example of is associated, functional, autonomous influence, and it has political influence. Now, final, and I'll end with this. Yes, the state can crush us. Absolutely positive. But that's going to require them not to use soft despotism, not to use regulatory measures, not to use simply like turn off the spigots from centralized technology. It's going to require them to exercise hard despotism against us. And we have to ask ourselves, are the American people ready to see hard despotism? And I think the answer, God willing, is not yet. And so what we can do in building these functional autonomous communities is we can actually provide better opt-outs. And this is something I want to say. So I'm on the board of the school, and so we have 7 children. 4 of my children are there now. 1 is already finished. And people like, are you in a siege mentality? Like, no, I'm not in a siege mentality. The government schools are terrible. I want to build something better. Right? So part of the idea is not that we simply just build like, my children use the word janky. Is that okay? Like some janky Catholic version, No, we want to build actually really serious, solid elements. And I think that the priest talked like we have this whole tradition of Catholic science and Catholic innovation, the commercial revolution in the medieval period. This is a tradition. And so part of the argument is not that we simply like exit because we're afraid. We exit because we're going to build better, healthier, beautiful places for human beings, children to flourish, where we can protect the vulnerable from the injustice of the transhumanist state, and where we can create spaces for people to flourish. And I believe, and maybe I'm naive, but I don't think so, that when people see, we have two things knocking on our door, nihilism and technocracy. And this idea that we're either going to escape and go off planet or upload ourselves or like turn ourselves into cyborgs, or we're just going to give everybody the UBI and free marijuana so they can just go and fade away. But I think people are going to realize there's a better alternative. And the better alternative is to a Catholic vision of the human person who's embodied, embedded, that our bodies are not an accident. We get them back at the end in the resurrection of the body, and that we're called to human flourishing right here in this world. And so this is where I see the possibility of a parallel polis, decentralization, and then the use of decentralized ledger technology and all the things that go around it so that we can actually create communities of flourishing. So thank you for your time. Thank you. I'll get that out of the way for you.
Good. All right. Thanks so much. Definitely a lot to think about. De Tocqueville kind of blew my mind in college. So good. We'll now take a break. Be sure to check out some of the vendor booths if you haven't already when you get a chance. And we'll gather at 12:30 for lunch and a keynote by Mark Yusko on incorporating Bitcoin and other crypto assets in our investment mixes. After lunch at 2:10, I believe, the next series of talks are in the Grand Ballroom, Catholics and the Metaverse. In the Centennial Ballroom 1, so just next door, is an introduction to Bitcoin. If you need an introduction to Bitcoin, I probably do. And then in here, Centennial Ballroom 2 and 3, the dynamic digital transformation taking place now. Remember, you're not locked into any particular track, so feel free to go to whichever talk your heart desires. Yes, sir? Sorry? Do you have any time for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah, we got a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
And critiques too, by the way, because it's complex. Let me just get a note so I can write it down. Yeah, happy to take questions. Peter, do you have a question? Yeah.
Peter Dowling, Washington University. Just maybe you could just talk about maybe compare and contrast your what you're proposing versus like we have the Benedict option.
Oh, yeah, good question. Okay. So the question was, is there something different from what you're saying than the Benedict option? And I said that's a good question. So I read the Benedict option a while ago. It's not very fresh in my mind. So I kind of joked in this digital contagion book, I called this the Tocqueville option, because everybody has to have their own option, right? And so I part of it is you can correct me if I misunderstand this. I think part of it is, so I really like St. Benedict and Benedictines. I was just at a Benedictine monastery last weekend. So and Robert Nisbet, who's I think a really great American sociologist, he's not a Catholic, and he makes errors on abortion and things, but he's really good. He's a Tocqueville-Burke guy. And he kind of goes through like different types of opt-outs. And so like one of the ways I think about the Benedict option, just because of St. Benedict, is that St. Benedict, right, remember, he's living in corrupt Rome, and he leaves Rome and then starts a community that's focused on certain elements, so like a school, right, for conversion of manners and stability and obedience, and he's creating he created this remarkable force that is really doing spiritual warfare at the edge of civilization. And then people came around it, and of course, as we know, Benedict influenced the development of capitalism and management and a host of other things. So, but there's a certain like kind of opt-out and rebuild. And so I think that, and the way that Dreyer explained it, and again, it was a long time ago, it was a kind of a journalistic explanation of there are a lot of different people who are opting out and kind of rebuilding. And so I think there's, in that sense, the opt-out rebuild is definitely probably aligned with it. And there's probably people in the opt-out rebuild who are doing kind of what I'm suggesting. And but I guess maybe a different focus And again, those of you who know the Benedict option, like, feel free to correct me. Maybe he says, I don't know. I don't remember. It was a while ago. But that it's less of a simple opt-out to kind of recover, as it is both an opt-out and an active participation in society, where we're actually building, we're not just saying, I'm going to go start a school, but we're actually going to rebuild hospitals, medical, banking, insurance companies that are both Catholic and rooted in this, using this distributed ledger technology, so that we're able to, it's like a lubricant for our participation in society. And so we're a little bit afraid that we're going to get deplatformed. That makes us quiet. And it makes us like, well, I better not take a risk because, look, I can't risk my family, I can't risk my job, I can't risk this, because what's going to happen, I'm going to get deplatformed. And I don't just mean from Twitter, okay? And like, you'll notice, if people want to build a new Twitter, that's fine, but I think that's actually not that important. I think what we really need to build is like new credit unions and new physician medical services. And so in a sense, that's where I guess maybe the different emphasis. But I do think that in a sense, recognizing that simple assimilation in America with the contemporary regime is not possible the way it was 30 years ago, would be, I think, in alignment with the Benedict option, for sure. I don't know if that helps. All right. Yes, sir.
I might just throw out an idea that I've been thinking about along these lines, and that I think a good example of transforming society with a Catholic perspective is Barcelona. And so if you look at Barcelona, Gaudi was like this architect who designed one of the most beautiful cities in the world by far. It's amazing. And he was a very devout Catholic that people consider putting him up to sainthood. But there's like this very deep, I don't know what you would call it, like tribal sense of beauty or something that I think really inspired this city that a lot of people of all creeds, I guess, find very amazing. So I think when you're thinking about how Catholics can transform the community, I think Barcelona and Gaudi is kind of an interesting source of inspiration.
Yeah, and that's interesting because Barcelona in many ways is like very hostile to Catholics, right? Because the Catalan, yeah, I mean, even like it is like that's where like the center of a lot of the communists in the Spanish Civil War, and so, but there you have, I think your point is, maybe if I'm understanding you, or at least how I would interpret it is, even in a hostile environment, by like creating lights of both, not just architectural lights, which we need, architectural lights, right? But also in a sense, social lights of flourishing that draw people. And that's why I said like this nihilism is knocking at the door. What people need is a sense of hope, and what the late Protestant sociologist Peter Berger called plausibility structures. So I give this talk on 10 steps or 15 steps to build the moral imagination. People need plausibility structures so that they can say, oh, that type of life is not just like ephemeral, but it's possible and plausible. And I think there maybe Gaudi is amidst communist secularism, and radical views, you have Gaudi as a light. It's interesting, yeah. Sir.
Hi, my name's Eno. I'm a technologist, I'm a product manager, and there's a lot of challenges to adopting new technology. As you know, people are flocking, ironically, to centralized blockchain platforms or exchanges like Coinbase or FTX because the user experience is superior.
Right.
So how do you think in short term the implications of trying to do something that is already complex to the average user and apply it to unifying the church and creating this?
Yeah, that's a good. That's a really important question. So let's try to talk afterwards because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'd like to get your hear you develop this more. So I mean, and Deacon Rich, he just left. He talks about this a little bit, right? There's different kinds of distributed ledgers. So blockchains can be permissioned, right? And they can be smaller, and they don't have to have a massive centralized element to them. I think your question is this is, I think, part of the innovation that has to take place. So, and again, this is going to be a very simplistic answer, so feel free to critique it. That I think in a sense, how many of us wanted to buy Bitcoin early, but are like, I don't know how to buy Bitcoin. You got to get a wallet and figure it out. And the time, even if you, the time of trying to do it, like, I just don't have time. I'm busy. So Coinbase comes, and you're like, oh, it's easy. Okay, I can do it. All right, and then I'll get the Ledger wallet and whatever, do it later, and like everything's gonna. So I think, and then second, I mean that clip they showed us about the internet this morning. You're like, what's the internet? What's the @ sign? I mean, blockchain. Like I always ask people, like, okay, explain crypto. Like almost nobody can explain crypto. Right? And so my 12-year-old's here. It was his birthday, so I brought him to a crypto conference for his birthday, poor guy. And I said, here, read this. And there's a chapter, it's a really nice book on blockchains, on cryptography, where you're talking about public keys and private keys and how it works. And, you know, it's 2 to the 256th power. And like, so in a sense, I think what we have to do is there's got to be plug and play type of versions that, as the technology becomes a little bit developed, we have to figure out, I think one of the things that maybe has to be done is we have to help, say, a diocese and schools, let's take Catholics, for example, as we heard earlier, need to apply them, say, for sacramental records. Or, so this school that I'm on the board of, and my children go, they use Google, and I'm like, Google Delenda S. I say, you know, every board meeting. So, but the question is, okay, fine, what? And the answer is, okay, we can do Proton Mail, and we can set up servers that way, but it's still a server, and we could do certain things. So I think part of what's going to need to be taking place is this very question of, we've so become used to centralization, and part of that's actually because it's easier and better, right? And just like sometimes small is beautiful, big is also beautiful, cheap, and efficient, right? The question is it the right, appropriate for the situation we're in? And so Google, so I'm going on negative Google. Google is amazing, right? There's reasons you want to use Gmail and G Suite and Docs and everything else, because it works. And in order to get off of it, it takes time and can, in fact, lower your productivity and efficiency. Right? It might help you sleep better, but it lowers your productivity and your efficiency. And so that's, I think, part of the struggle that we're in. That I don't think there's a simple answer to. I think it's going to need a lot of hard work and technological innovation, and that's why I think we need to, in a sense, create companies, consulting firms, et cetera, that are trying to address this. And I know, like I mentioned, Balaji Srinivasan in the network state, he's trying to address this and investing in people who are trying to do this. So I don't know if that answers your question well enough, but I think your point is absolutely essential, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it. Sir?
Hi. Yeah, I'm Chris Neihart. I'm the Villanova's theology department in the doctoral studies. And I'm interested in the sort of sociological side of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because I agree that it's not just the tech, right? There's sort of social structures that need to exist. So when we talk about functional, autonomous, decentralized associations, I'm wondering how those interface with the ecclesial life of the church, which, you know, among other Christian communities is like the most centralized way of being as a community. I mean, the Catholic Church is a centralizing force throughout history is like one of the largest stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering how you imagine functional, autonomous, decentralized associations interfacing with ecclesia, right? With the church itself.
It's a good question. So I have to think about it more, because it's really, it's a very, like, I think there's probably multiple ways. So I'm going to be thinking about this, and let's talk about it after. But I think what we have, and then let me try to take a first answer at this. So we have the church, the ecclesia, which is both centralized and diverse, right? So at some points, like the Vatican says, I don't have any jurisdiction here. And that to Catholics is like, of course you don't, like no big deal. But to like Protestants, they're like, wait, isn't the Pope like the dictator? Okay, so you already have like some decentralization taking place. But then you also have like, there's ecclesiastical structures, and there's canon law, and then there's religious orders, and there's lay people. And as you know better than I, because I'm not a theologian, the canon law applies differently to lay people than it does to clerics. Thanks be to God. So sometimes I tell clerics, you're under the obedience of the bishop, but I'm under the obedience of God. So I get to say things you can't say. I think one of the things is recognizing where these layers of authority go and how they relate. And then there's doctrinal questions, right, where the bishop has authority over doctrinal questions. And of course, this is like the big problem at universities, right? With Ex Cordia Ecclesiae, how do we think about the role of the Catholic and then academic freedom, et cetera? So you have these kind of different structures. And then you have these two important principles of subsidiarity and solidarity. We often will think of solidarity as the state does it, but I think that's a Rousseauian and incorrect reading of solidarity. Solidarity doesn't identify the community with the political community. Solidarity is the thinking of the whole and the common good and the inspiration of brotherly love. And subsidiarity is the practice those closest to the situation deal with it because they have the most local knowledge and appropriate response or responsibility over it. And so I think that the alignment is that we probably need, certain clarity of jurisdictions, right, which the Catholic Church gives us. So like one of the things I want to say, like, okay, there have been these developments, some of you probably are involved in, of charismatic communities or certain communities that grow up. And there's a lot of fruit that comes from it, but sometimes they can break down because in a sense the leaders become spiritual authorities, but they're not actually spiritual authorities, right? This is why I was kind of joking, like I'm worried about arguing for Catholic organizations, right? So my children used to go to this, it was an ecumenical classical school. It had Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants. And when we moved over to the Catholic school, I was like, we're gonna get in fights about so many stupid things, it's gonna be unbelievable. So I think like there's practical elements of like where these things need to be jurisdiction, but I think where the alignment goes is that lay people have a specific mission and charism in the church. And too often, I think since the Vatican II, lay people are trying to get into the sanctuary and priests are trying to get into the world. And so part of, I think, what we need to do is we need both theoretical and then practical explanations so that lay people can really understand their mission and their charism. And that's why it's not a parastate organization. And it's a little bit uncomfortable for us, to be honest, to do what I'm suggesting. Because what we'd rather do is just have secular associations and we just move in those. The problem is, as like Yeshiva University found out, they didn't register as an Orthodox Jewish university. They registered as a secular university, and so now the sexual state is creating difficulties for them. And so it's unfortunate. Part of what I'm saying is it's like maybe not the optimal situation, but it's might be the optimal situation in an increasingly secular state where secularism is dying and we're seeing a re-mythologization and a re-paganization. And so we have to create, as it were, a proactive response now so that we don't just get individually shut off and then it's too late. So I know that like I didn't fully answer the complexity, but it's a super important question, so thanks. One more or no?
I think we should probably take a break. And, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you everybody. I'll be around.